continuing my theme of getting non-historical military simulation games from SPI. I picked up a copy of John Carter, Warlord of Mars. This came out in, was it, 79. I've accumulated a number of other SPI titles that are not historical. I've got some historical ones too. Those I've acquired earlier. My latest sort of buying phase of SPI titles has been focusing on some of the sci-fi, fantasy, or alt history type things. So you've got Star Force Trilogy After the Holocaust, which is your post nuclear apocalypse simulation. The Games of Middle Earth, War in the Ice, which is the hypothetical battle for Antarctica, I think, between the Soviets and the Americans, and Sorcerer, which is a total fantasy title. So the Edgar Rice Burroughs John Carter title is sort of continuing that theme of sci-fi fantasy stuff, which SPI is not as well known for. Typically when you think of SPI, I think of East Front type games, or I guess the Next War games. And I think there's Next War, and then I feel like there were expansions or parts of that that they added after the fact. I don't remember what they are, but that was one that one of their big soapbox games that I kind of remember. And that was World War III in Europe type stuff. So SPI, just when I think of it, I think of historical simulations and less of sci-fi or fantasy. So I wanted to kind of explore some of those titles. And typically, the SPI sci-fi and fantasy titles are cheaper to acquire than their historical titles. Depending on condition and so forth. The Star Force Trilogy Soapbox Edition was not cheap, but I believe it's fairly easy to acquire those 3 games in that Star Force Trilogy, the separate titles in flat packs or whatever, for fairly cheap. I just love the soapboxes, so that's why I hunted down the soapbox version of it. But John Carter is one of the more expensive titles in their sci-fi fantasy lineup. Usually it's going to fetch $50 or more on the secondary market. So I found an unpunched copy for a little more than that, but not too expensive. And I have to say I do like the cover artwork. It is classic pulp sci-fi, and that the cover illustrates that perfectly. Although this is interesting, his I'm gonna get it without the glare here. Carter's sort of chest piece here makes me think of He-Man, or the logo itself. At first glance, the black and yellow makes you think of Batman, but a fairly classic fantasy cover art. Big strapping hero, lithe, scantily clad woman clinging to him. Beast in the background. What the heck was this thing's name? His faithful dog, basically, is who that is, and I cannot think of his name. I've enjoyed the book, but it's been so long since I've read it. I've seen the movie more recently, the notorious flop movie, which I actually thought was really good. Saw that recently and can't remember the name of his faithful hound. But anyway, I love the font they use for it. It's interesting they use this kind of fancy font here, and then a fairly standard block, sort of bold-faced block font for the rest of it. Biggest thing when I was researching this was I did not realize that this was Mark Herman design. So this would be right up there with the Art of Siege tire module as one of your earliest Mark Herman designs. So I thought that was interesting. Kind of made me more interested to give it a try. I've actually been playing a lot of Mark Herman games lately. with most recently Churchill. And then also I dabbled a little bit into Pacific War, which I believe he's working on a remake of with Nuts Publishing in France. So it'll be interesting to see what they turn up with that. So as was the case with most of these titles, or most SPI games of the year, there's nothing on the back. It's all done on the cover. Pop it open. Cards, and as was the case with most cards of this era, they are on a punch-out sheet, very thin cardstock, and you'll end up punching these out. What I will do most likely with cards like this is cut them out with a rotary cutter, or may punch them out and just trim them up with the rotary cutter, but that gets rid of the any little wispy tufts of stuff that you usually get when you punch these kinds of cards out. So there's actually quite a few sheets of this. So it looks like you've got movement cards, random event cards, diplomacy cards, option cards, more random events. And that's actually a lot of cards. More movement cards, more random events, acquisitions. This must be gear and so forth. Yep. Weapons, things like that. Oh, cool. So quite a few sheets. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sheets of cards. Here, fortunately, unlike most SPI games of this era, the charts and tables are in a separate little booklet here. It's a little bit disconcerting that there's this many charts and tables for a sci-fi game. But usually these, in some of the other SPI titles of this era, the charts and tables have been buried in the middle of the manual, or you'd have to cut them out, or pop staples out and lift them out, or whatever. So this is nice. They're on a separate little booklet. It's not cardstock like we're used to today with charts and tables. It is just regular paper. Good stock paper, good SPI stock paper, but they are in their own little booklet, which is nice. 2 copies, also very nice. Sometimes the publishers of this era tended to be a little stingier on multiple copies of charts and tables. And this, which I've already flipped through, looks like it's primarily all of your background and stuff on Edgar Rice Burroughs, Barsoom, Princess of Mars, World, and pretty dense. I mean, look at that, just dense text, pages and pages of it. Talks about history, weapons, religion, the military, effects of the legacy of John Carter. So really cool supplement here. I look forward to reading it. Just covering. This is all just background stuff. This is not gameplay related at all, which is really cool. That SPI spent the money to include something like that. That's kind of just pure flavor for the game. Here's the rule booklet, which is going to be your standard SPI rule booklet of the era, which has your case organization style, which I always like. Kind of it's really the standard for how you should organize your rule books. And so it's not an insignificant number of rules for the game, 28 pages. So we got sequence of play there. So you get like 2 versions of the game. Looks like a military sort of strategic tactical game, and then a strategic operational game, and then a dueling kind of tactical style game. So it'll be interesting. I have not read the rules yet, so it'll be interesting to see how these read, how these work. I'm not sure if Mark Herman wrote these rules in their entirety, or if I believe there was another name credited on here for the... Well, no, it's just designed by Mark Herman. I thought maybe I'm thinking of the Board Game Geek entry lists another guy's name who may have been like an editor or something on the rules. So the rules for Herman's tire module in Art of Siege, decent but not spectacular. Early design, mostly issues with clarity or things being left out. The case where you had omissions of possible outcomes and where you're sort of left to guess what you should do in a particular situation just because the rules did not go so far as to encompass a particular situation. So it made some difficulty there, so I'll be curious to see how these rules read as another early Mark Herman design. Who, I should say that, not a criticism of Mark Herman's rules overall, they're actually very good, but I noticed in the tire module, being a very early Mark Herman design, that the rules were not at the level of later Mark Herman designs, which you would expect if somebody's designing, doing some of their earliest designing work, they're only going to improve over time. So we'll see how these stack up to those early Mark Herman tire era rules. Here is the counter sheet. Very typical SPI counters at the time, the lovely matte finish, which we can all enjoy, and typical, in terms of graphic design, typical Simonson type design, where you've got some kind of symbol in the background with text overlay. These a little bit harder to read than other SPI counters of the era. Partly because of the size of the background image with the overlaid text. This particular symbol in the background kind of works to visually interrupt your eye from actually reading the text. Zoomed in, it doesn't look so bad. When you zoom out, that text just disappears into a jumble of visual noise of the background. So these are a little rougher than most Simmons encounters are. A lot of Simmons encounters are going to be more like this, just two color, very clear. When you get into the three color counters, kind of makes things a little tougher. Certainly very colorful visually, but not as easy to read with all that kind of noise going on. So kind of, I don't say I hate them, but kind of a rare swing and a miss, I think, for Simmons encounters. They are double-sided. Some don't have information on the back, some do. And the map. Set the camera down. Open this up. And split into multiple sections, so you've got like a city map here, then you have more of a whole world tactical map of Barsoom there. There's your tactical map. Looks like you've got palace display, open arena display, that would be for the dueling, a flyer display, maybe you'll be fighting on board a ship. Don't know, haven't read the rules yet. And then working out a terrain key. Okay, so that's just for the tactical map. I was going to say, interesting having a terrain key for when you've got 4 different things going on the map here. Now there's your Barsoom map terrain key. And your city map terrain key. So they do have terrain keys for all the different maps. So again, sort of a colorful mishmash of stuff on the map here, which would be expected when you're going to be dealing with multiple scales on a single map. So interesting. So a little different design visually. Notice the blue background. Typical SPI maps of the era always had that kind of gray background. So this even departs from your typical SPI design elements of this era. And then, as is always the case, counter tray, no lid, it looks like. It's interesting, usually these type of counter trays have lids on them. But it is interesting they do have a 20-sided die here that doesn't have the numbers shaded in, so I'll have to do that myself, because it actually seems like a fairly decent die, a little heft to it. I like the angular corners on it. It's a lot like the Game Science dice that are very angular. They haven't been rolled around in a tumbler to round the edges off, so kind of nice. I'd be curious to see how it rolls. But anyway, there we have a look inside the box at another SPI. I don't know if this one is really a classic or not, but I guess classic in terms of age. It's 35 years old, 36 years old, so another look at an SPI sci-fi title, John Carter, Warlord of Mars.